There we go.
Hi.
Hi, Andrea. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing okay.
Yeah. And I see that Arlene is trying to join. Excellent. Hello, Arlene.
There's Arlene.
Hi.
Good. How are you, Arlene?
Andrea. I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Yeah, we've got a little bit of an issue over here with the heater isn't on. So if you hear a roaring in the background, I have a space heater on right now. So
Happening with the heat, you know?
Linda has made a bunch of phone calls, and that's about all I know because I've been involved in Zoom meetings, and we actually, lots of excitement. The fellows from Dream Lab were here a week early with the equipment.
Oh,
So yes, it's been quite the morning over here.
I know there was a message from Todd on the machine, but Richard's out doing furniture for Joshua project today, and that's probably why he called.
Right. Well, no, so what ended up happening is they've dropped off the equipment. It's in the sanctuary, and the installation will still go in at the regular time. But yes, it's
Okay.
been quite the day.
Yeah.
Well, I see that it's 12 o'clock, and I heard from both Susan and Harriet that they are unable to make it today. I don't know who else will be able to make it. So I figured let's get started with some prayer, and then I have the various readings lined up. But I would love to have either of you do readings too if you would like. So. But let's start with some prayer and get going. And again, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, just like last week's discussion was. All right, let us pray. Merciful God, we welcome you to this time to study your word. Your word contains truths to us, and we ask that you open our hearts and minds to hear your word of truth in new and interesting ways, or perhaps in familiar ways that we have forgotten. We thank you for this time to be in fellowship together, and we are grateful as well to be gathered in this place, in this space, with you and with each other. In your name we pray, amen. So yes, one of the comments or suggestions, actually, I should say, from last week's discussion was to start more dedicated Bible study. And I realized, there's no reason why the time that I spend on a Tuesday, looking at the scriptures for the upcoming Sunday, why I can't share that with people. So this is a little bit more of an informal thing, but it was something that I could start pretty easily and pretty quickly. So my normal process is to look at the upcoming scriptures, to read through them, to make some notes about what I am thinking about, what I'm feeling, what leaps out at me from the texts, keeping in mind any upcoming themes. For example, the upcoming Sunday, the theme is the Transfiguration of the Lord. And so when I was just kind of skimming through the texts to orient my own thinking, I had the thought, why did I start with the Transfiguration of the Lord Sunday? Because it's complicated, but then, why not start there? So the readings for this upcoming Sunday are 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. It's very long. It's about Elijah. Psalm 50, verses 1 through 6. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 to 6, and Mark 9, verses 2 through 9. I typically just start at the top, and I figure we can start at 2 Kings. Would either of you like to do the reading, or would you like me to start it off?
I don't mind. I just have to find it in my Bible.
Yes.
Second, I had it written down on a piece of paper, but I've left that behind somewhere.
Yes.
Tell me again.
Sure.
Second
Kings, verses, 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And
Okay,
I have a little title on mine that says Elijah Ascends to Heaven.
right.
Yep.
And it goes to 12.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel, came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "but do not speak of it." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "but do not speak of it." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men of the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, my father." The chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Yeah, there's a lot in that text. So what jumped out at either one of you as Arlene was reading that?
Okay, number one, I have to admit, I am not a Bible reader. Richard is the Bible reader in the family. One reason is because I just have so much trouble, and I don't know if it's that I try to see too much in things, if I should just read it, walk away, read it again. So I want to listen to you two, okay?
Sure. I would suggest that as you are, in your words, reading too much, and make note of those things, because sometimes it can get our minds thinking down very interesting paths, and I'd be very curious to hear at some point what that too much is. Okay, Diane, but sure. Arlene, did anything jump out at you as you were reading?
Well, yes and no. It's a passage that often, I taught Sunday school for many, many, many years. And it was a story that was often used in Sunday school lessons. And first of all, the children were always confused by Elijah and Elisha, just the name.
Yes.
And it repeats a lot, which I think has something to do with the fact that it was the probability that it was almost certainly handed down orally. I think it was a way for them to help it helped the tellers remember things. I don't know that for sure, but I would say that. And then the story with the chariot is just kind of mind-boggling. the chariots of fire, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is very much, when I read it, I see it as Elijah is leaving, and Elisha is trying to process this. So often, he's told, "I am leaving," and other people tell Elisha, the younger, that Elijah, the older, is leaving, and Elisha is just saying, "No, I know, I hear, but I can't. Don't tell me this right now. I can't handle it. I hear, kind of that, let me process what's happening on my own time. You all might be ready to admit this, but I cannot yet." And, is that because Elisha knows that he is going, he asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, and, I'll need to look into at some point, what that meant in terms of the context, because that's a lot of this oral, as Arlene said, this oral history that's been passed down. There are these cultural contexts and these storytelling methods that don't make as much sense to us now. We read this and I'm just like, okay, there's the same story being told 3 times, the same little vignette being said 3 times. So is that just because there are 3 different versions that all joined together, or is it, you have this repetition to help the storyteller, and so yes, it becomes this long thing that when I read the thing in its entirety, I just see someone who is trying to process the grief of someone that he loves dearly not being there anymore, and trying to deal with the responsibility that is to come, and just trying to process that. And we all have our times, no matter where we are in life, when multiple people are trying to tell us something and we just can't hear it yet. I think that there's been certainly a lot of that going on during coronavirus, of, and there's so many different things going on, of, so many different stories happening and so much to process that, that it's just, I can only handle so many things at once, is what Elisha is saying. I can't handle Elijah leaving, but I must follow. So that's some of the things that strike out to me. Any other comments?
Was Elijah I was just looking back in my Bible, and I'm not finding it. Was he the same person who had they were surrounded by the enemy, but there were all these heavenly armies that were surrounding them and keeping them safe?
Oh, that's right.
And I was trying to remember whether there was fire involved with that. He's the one that he was in the cave and God spoke to him.
Right.
And at first it was and then it was the still small voice. But I'd have to look further for that. I don't want to sidetrack us, so.
That's a very good question. Let's see. I'll write down Elijah and fire and imagery, and I'll look that up at some point, Arlene.
Okay. Well, I may find it
Right.
between now and next week, but I'm not going to look for it now.
Okay. I hear you. And there's yeah, I mean, with 4 texts to get through, there's kind of we can only spend 15 minutes per text, but this is such a longer one, and some of the others are a little bit shorter. So, yeah, so this text, I think that that you're raising a good point, that Elisha might feel not quite up to Elijah's example. So you have a little bit of that succession issue of, the person whom I'm replacing was so powerful. How can I ever fill their shoes? And, so that could be why he's asking for this double portion of Elijah's spirit. Let's see here, double portion. Because, he might be feeling just feelings of inadequacy, of, how will I ever live up to what has happened? So yeah, it'll be interesting if we can figure out if it is Elijah or Elisha who had that experience of the armies coming, because that also would speak to, the student doing more or different things than the person that the student learned from. So it does get into a lot of that succession sorts of issues. How do we live with the legacy that we are given? Now, certainly in some of the next verses immediately after we have the story of Elijah and Elisha, we do see Elisha stepping into that role, performing the miracles. And yeah, there's war stories both with Elijah and with Elisha. So yeah, it'll be interesting as we are going forward with this to delve into some of those stories a little bit more. Last week's Old Testament did not involve any of this story. So, but that's because this is specifically for Transfiguration Sunday, and some of those specific texts don't necessarily follow whatever story has been going on in the lectionary. It's something different that is put into the order. So I've taken down some notes of things that we've said about this one, and as my own worship planning goes, it'll either go into the sermon or into a note in the Carillon, a little bit more of a text study about what's going on, or as emails amongst ourselves. But let's move on now to the Psalm, which is Psalm 50, verses 1 through 6. And I'm always happy to read. Arlene, you just read, but I'm assuming that you're also happy to read if you feel so inclined. And Diane, are you feeling comfortable or not? No, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. So Arlene, shall I take this one then?
Sure.
Okay. And I'm reading from an NRSV version. I've got a couple different study Bibles. Some are NIV, some are NRSV. Yeah. So
the Bible I was reading from is an NIV.
Yep. All right, Psalm 50. The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes and does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire and a mighty tempest all around God. God calls to the heavens above and to the earth that God may judge the people. Gather to me, my faithful ones, who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare God's righteousness, for God is judge. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I confess that I am not an expert on the Psalms and where they come from, and you know who, what time period they come from. So whenever I'm looking at the Psalms, I am looking at them from a sense of song and how people express their joy, their sorrow, their frustrations, and how it comes out in art. And this particular study Bible that I have doesn't have anything specific about these verses that I just read. But I love the imagery of, the rising of the sun to its setting. But then you also have God coming forth as devouring fire. And so there's a little bit of terror in that imagery for me. Do either of you have any thoughts about this particular song?
The only thing I want to say is I find, like, you pick out a certain one because you can't do the whole thing a lot of times, but then I find I keep reading.
Yes.
Because that kind of completes it a little bit more for me.
Yes.
So yeah, so I keep going. And also I don't have a study Bible, and that would make a difference too. If I got a study Bible, probably would
maybe not.
possibly help me.
I mean,
Yeah.
There are several in the church library.
The library.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I put red stickers on the books that aren't supposed to leave the library. The library has suffered greatly from inattention for a year or more, but the ones with the red stickers are not supposed to go out, but the other ones, we have a little card box and you can borrow one, and I put library slips in all of them.
Okay, I'll look tomorrow. I have to come over for a deacon's meeting, so I'll take a look.
Yeah, I was actually about to recommend the resource of the library. Really, any Bible is, they're all good. They all have their own things. The advantage of a study Bible, sometimes they have a little bit of information about where, the scholarship of some of the words or phrases, some commentary from other, biblical scholars, etc. The Bible that I'm actually using right now is it's a spiritual formation Bible that I actually inherited from another pastor she had been the pastor at the church that I grew up in, but she retired before I got into any of the youth group programs. Or not retired, sorry, she changed, she went to another church. When she finally retired, she ended up going back to that particular church to attend, as that church was on the decline and ultimately merged with another. And right before I actually went before Presbyterian for my examination for ordination, she died the day before. And so her husband ended up gifting me with a lot of her old books and some of the stoles that I wear and things like that. So, so the nice thing about this particular Bible is it has all of her notes in it. Yes, yeah. So I sometimes have to squint hard to interpret some of her handwriting, but it's very interesting to get some of her notes and insights on it, and so that's what makes this particular Bible very special to me.
And there's a lot to be said for just reading the plain Bible, whichever version you're reading. But and you have to. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that some study Bible, there's always a slant to a study Bible.
Yes.
I went to a Bible study in California. We used the Schofield, and that was extremely conservative, and it kind of sometimes would just set off alarm bells for me. What was I can't think of the kind of philosophy dispensationalist. Yeah. So But if you, anything that's in our church library, with the exception of the books that haven't been vetted, should be okay.
Yeah. Yep. And you're right that every study Bible, it's very interesting that even a study Bible that was written 20 years ago versus now, you can actually see some of the cultural shifts in how questions are written and how they're phrased. So that's another fascinating study. Um, how do people write these study Bibles? I'm actually going to write that down of as something to look into as a possible other, further study is just how do we write our study Bibles?
I would guess most of them are written by a team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you say, every team is going to go in with a certain lens, a certain, I have another Bible that the pages are, acid-free, recycled paper. The ink is soy-based ink, and it's called the Green Bible. And so instead of Jesus' words being highlighted in red, like a red letter Bible, words that according to the people who put this Bible together, verses that seem to really evoke care of creation, those are actually printed in green ink. And so it's very interesting. I got that Bible, I think I picked it up while I was in seminary, and reading some of the study questions and study guides now, and this is 15 years later, and some of the study guides, I'm thinking, well, a lot of my friends who are very much into creation care would actually say that this Bible is out of date in terms of its suggestions. I hope that Linda picks up the phone soon. She should. She is here. Anyway, but back to this particular. Diane, I was curious. What kind of Bible are you using?
Well, right now I have in front of me a Good News Bible, which is very basic language.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely will look tomorrow at what's available in the library. I know we have other versions around of different Bibles.
Yeah, it's interesting how the poetry of especially the Psalms is different in the different Bibles as well, because the NRSV and the NIV, there's a lot of high scholarship in those particular versions, and some of the poetry is lost. Whereas, yes,
Go ahead. One of the things I love about the King James, because I love poetry, is how poetic it is, particularly the Psalms, and the book of Job is just, it's like one of my favorite, when God speaks to Job, it's just, wow.
And Richard just walked in the door and informed me we have a King James version. Okay. So my Bible guy just told me.
There you go. And that's actually, Arlene, you nailed it on the head. That's exactly what I was going to say, is that well, a lot of your hardcore biblical scholars will actually look down on the King James Version for being out of date and not scholarly. The poetry in it is just amazing. But again, you look at who was actually doing those translations and writing it down, and at the time that it was written, you had playwrights who are doing the translations. So of course you would have poetry in the language. So yeah, and so you'll use different Bibles for study versus devotional time versus whatever. And a Bible like the Good News Bible is one of the most readable Bibles there is, because it does use that just down to earth basic language. it's readable. and the NRSV is sometimes not readable. So yeah. Well, we kind of got away a little bit from Psalm 50, but I think that we had a good discussion about how to read the Bible instead. Anything else that speaks out about Psalm 50?
Well, the first part of it is like you can tell that it's a song or a hymn.
Yeah.
You know, the first first 6 verses really just, I mean, you could put that to music very easily.
Yep.
Or, well, if you're a musician, you could. I couldn't.
Yeah, and oh, I don't have either of my Presbyterian. I've got my Methodist hymnal in here. I don't have a Presbyterian hymnal, but I was going to look up to see what songs. But I'm going to make note to remind Susan that maybe we should rely on Psalm 50 for some of our music in worship this week.
I'm just going to mute because Richard's home making lunch. Okay, so I'm going to listen.
Okay.
you don't hear him making lunch. Okay?
You know, such is life. Well, if there's nothing else to comment on with the psalm, then let's move on to 2 Corinthians. So that was 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 to 6. Arlene, do you want to take this one?
Sure.
Thank you.
Just make sure I'm in the right place here.
Mm-hmm.
And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ.
Thank you, Arlene. So what jumps out to you from that one? Or I can say, one of the first things that comes to me, there's so much in it, but this idea of minds being blinded, and then you have the image of the light shining out from the darkness again, and so you have this idea of clouded sight, veiled sight, inability to see for whatever reason, and then you have this epiphany, or the world around you is transformed, and so this play of light and darkness, and it's so driving along on a day like today when the snow is falling, and it was sometimes hard to see between road spray and snow, and the wipers doing their thing of not actually making a clean pass over the windshield. The sight is cloudy and it's tough to drive, and it's like, okay, what am I doing on the road right now when everything is like this? But then your wipers work and the washer fluid works, and you're able to see again, and it's like, oh, okay, I can do this, and the conditions still might not be great, but I can at least do this. So that is actually one of the things that comes to mind for me. Can you tell it was a little tough on the road today? Either of you, what comes to mind? And it's okay if nothing comes to mind.
What do you think the God of this age is referring to?
Ah, yes, the God of this age. So when I see that in my version, God is lowercase, and
Right.
so that tells me that it is not God as in El, the God of the Israelites. So when I read, the God of this age, it speaks to me about idolatry. It about we humans, we have a hard time conceptualizing God as God is, and so we try to make God smaller, and more manageable, and all of these are idols, and it's not the true God. Um, so yeah, the phrase, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. It makes me think of the last couple of weeks there's been false prophets that have been mentioned, and so it makes me think of everything in this world that calls attention away from God's message of love. Anything that tries to grab that focus and say, well, don't look over there, do this, only listen to me, don't listen to any other sources. It could be money, it could be politicians, it could be sports, it could be all kinds of different things that we end up being consumed by. It can be media of various forms. It can be conspiracy theories. It can be really anything that calls that attention away from God's message of love. That's how I read the God of this world. It isn't El. It is those little things that keep us blind to God's message of love. And the reason why I keep saying, El is because that's the ancient Israel, word for God. Because when we're saying, God lowercase versus God uppercase, it gets a little bit confusing. So does that explanation make sense? Is it a jumping off point for thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's a really good insight. I'm actually going to make note of it. The God of this world. And I can absolutely see how it's confusing, especially when, we talk about, again, back to some of the poetry, when I hear the phrase that, the God of this world, I think of the kingdom of this world, or from the Messiah and things like that. And because we do talk of Christ being the God of this world, and but that is God with a capital G.
Right.
And so that's everything. That's the gospel of love, of everything that we were talking about last week. So yeah, when I see God with a lowercase g in this study Bible, I interpret that as those lesser things that we as humans idolize and idolatrize.
Well, it's obviously not God anyway, because they're blinding the minds of unbelievers. So
Yep. So it is. It's a distractor. It's a false god. And I think that I think that each of us is thinking about various examples of false gods that we have seen recently. Yeah, actually, as I was hearing you read this passage, Arlene, I was thinking, this is very preachable. so I might I might actually do a sermon on 2 Corinthians this week. Because every year Transfiguration of the Lord comes around, and, we go back to that same theme. But I might do 2 Corinthians this year. Any other thoughts, questions? Another thing for me about this particular verse is, it starts off in such a cloudy statement. You've got, vision is, the gospel is veiled. It's veiled to those who are perishing. You have the false gods that blind the minds of the unbelievers, etc. And then you have this transforming light that shines and illuminates what's going on. So there's so much imagery in this. So I'm actually really looking forward to talking about this one in the sermon. So yeah. But if that's all the questions and comments for this one, then let's move on to the Mark text. So this one is Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. And I might as well read this one, since we seem to be going back and forth, Arlene, which I've quite appreciated. Let us listen for God's word. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. All right. Thoughts, questions, comments? This one very much ties in with the imagery from 2 Kings with Elijah coming. And then the other thing about the 2 Kings reading, which I had the thought at the time and I should have mentioned it, is especially with Elijah, dividing the water in half and crossing over, you have a lot of Moses imagery. And so then to have Moses show up in this passage, that really ties it all together, Moses and Elijah and then Jesus. There's that progress through, and there's that connection between all of them. And I always love, how nervous Peter is that he blurts out, "Let's just make 3 dwellings," and because he has no idea, he's so terrified that he doesn't know what to say. And I always love some of those insights into Simon Peter's character. He's so human and relatable. So what are some of your questions and comments?
Well, one of the other things is, and I think I heard it from somebody else, I don't think it was an original thought, but sometimes when we have a great spiritual experience. We just sort of want to shut ourselves off and stay with that. And Jesus doesn't let them do that. They have to go down from the mountain and rejoin the world, so to speak. That, and what, I mean, that's subject to interpretation, but that idea of building these tents for the three, Moses, Jesus, and Elijah, was sort of like that when we want to set ourselves apart instead of being in the world and not of the world, so, if you will.
Right. Yeah, rejoin the world versus being set apart. And, because there is a lot of that imagery in our faith. You have the city on the hill, all these things that are set apart. And are we really supposed to be apart, or are we supposed to be, living that lived experience with the world, in the world? You've got various monasteries and retreat centers and everything that's kind of this time apart and this awayness, but at some point that awayness, that being separatedness, does need to come back somehow. And we're kind of in this extended period as a world of awayness, but we're learning things and we're having interesting experiences, whether they are good or bad. Sometimes that's in the interpretation. And at some point we are going to come out of this experience. And how do we come down this mountain? Whether it has been a good mountain or a bad mountain, how do we come down off of it? And when is it time to? Because you're right, we can't just make dwellings up here apart and staying away. So it's a matter of reading the signs and knowing and trusting. And sometimes it's difficult to know. But yeah, I like that insight of we can't stay up on the mountain with this spiritual experience of Jesus and Moses and Elijah. The disciples, they have to come down, and Jesus comes with them. He doesn't stay up on the mountain either. He comes down with them at this time. It also does tie into when Elijah ascended with that chariot of fire and all of that imagery. He ascended away, and Elisha came back by himself. And when these figures, Moses and Elijah, were there with Jesus, they didn't stay with everyone. They left again, and Jesus came down with the disciples. And so there is this imagery of, at some point, Jesus is going to take the same road as Moses, as Elijah. And some one of these days, the disciples will come down the mountain or come away from a transformative experience, and Jesus won't physically be with them, but they still need to come down and rejoin the world. So there's also some foreshadowing in this. You also have, back to the baptism of Jesus. You have a voice from the cloud saying, "This is my son, the beloved." So that ties back into, baptism, of God claiming, this is my son, my beloved one. And so you have these claiming, this claiming imagery. You have this transformation imagery. One thing that it doesn't say is whether or not Jesus' robes stayed bleached white. It just occurred to me that he's been, you have this transformation, very early on in the story. He was transfigured before then. His clothes became dazzling, and when Moses and Elijah left, was Jesus still transfigured? was there still some kind of a visible change about him? Or did he come down the mountain looking just the same as everyone else? We don't know. So there's very much this acknowledgement of the divinity and the humanity of Christ at the same time. Let's see, I had yes, one of my other books says that transfiguration refers to a change in form or appearance. At the transfiguration of the Lord, we celebrate the revelation of divine glory in the human life of Jesus Christ. And then it continues, Jesus' radiant appearance on the mountaintop evokes the consuming fire of the glory of the Lord at Mount Sinai. So you have another mountaintop experience. And the interesting thing about that particular mountaintop experience, that ties back to Moses and everything, is the Israelites, when they saw God in the consuming fire, they were terrified and they declared that they must have a prophet to interpret the word of the Lord, so that, because if they saw God's glory again, they would surely die. So it might be transforming, this experience, but again, it can also be terrifying, as the disciples were scared. Sorry, that was my phone for some reason. I keep forgetting to put it on silent for these things. I'm gonna have to remember to do that. So yeah, there's a lot packed into this imagery, a lot that goes back to the Old Testament. Let's see here. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming, for being a part of this, and I'll continue doing this as long as people are interested. I really appreciated having your insights and your comments as part of Bible study. Looking forward to Sunday. And as I've said a number of times, at some point in the weeks coming forward, I'll also come up with some topical Bible study as well, so that instead of just looking at the lectionary, I'll actually have some study guides and things like that prepared, so that we can do some in-depth study. And I thought of starting with Paul, mostly because of a chance comment that Denise made last week about how whenever she's trying to figure things out, she goes to Paul first. So, so yeah, I'll have some other opportunities as well. Any of your thoughts, just going forward?
Thank you. You were both very helpful.
Thank you for being here, both of you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea.
Bye.
Shall we say a prayer before leaving, or are you hungry,
Yes.
Anne? Okay.
No.
I'll make it quick. Almighty and merciful God, we thank you for the opportunity to have fellowship with one another, to study your word, and to have our minds be unclouded and unveiled and transfigured in heart and mind and spirit. We ask, O God, that you bless our days as we go forward in them. Anyone who's driving, please keep them safe on the roads. Bless the food that Diane is about to eat, and Arlene too, if she hasn't had lunch yet. And let us be transfigured in your word, that all may see your light shining in everything that we do. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, thank you very much. And I'll post this later.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye.